Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kepp, a co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values, and we're looking forward to today's webinar, an excellent topic we've got for you. But before we introduce today's speakers, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up next week, Wednesday, August 18th, and it's titled Learning from a Crisis About What Working Parents Need. This is a very pressing concern as parents send their kids back to school, and this conversation will be quite relevant to HR leaders who want to offer support. Thanks to our partners and today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who've joined today's webinar. That would be you. I'm putting a link in the chat right now. You'll want to take advantage of this opportunity since the regular price for our conference tickets is $149, and this link will give you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. And now on to today's webinar. There's a lot of focus on the future of work right now. In fact, it feels like we're living in a speeded up version of that conversation. And there's been a renewed focus on communication skills and other soft skills for new hires in light of the hybrid and distributed work environments that are developing. Today, we'll be exploring a particular and timely aspect of that trend. Our title for today's session is Hiring for Teams with the Right Combination of Soft Skills. Teamwork calls for a particular set of skills, including collaboration, listening, and conflict management. Among the questions we'll be addressing, how can employers assess those skills objectively in prospective hires? What are some of the essential soft skills right now, including adaptability, problem solving, creativity? What can companies do to compose teams with the right combination of skills since they vary from person to person? Our sponsor today is SkillSurvey, and I'll tell you a bit about them. SkillSurvey provides a talent intelligence platform you can trust. Trust inspired by great data, proven science, and actionable information. SkillSurvey's platform delivers measurable data at critical touch points of the employee lifecycle, from hiring to employee exit. SkillSurvey helps 33,000 users make better decisions on 150,000 job candidates each month. Now, a few logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credit for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. And lastly, about 45 minutes into the hour, we'll begin a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar, starting now, using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, the insightful and congenial Lydia Dishman, a staff editor for Fast Company, who's an expert on topics including leadership, technology, and the workplace. Lydia has also written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, Popular Science, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We are so pleased to have you and have you take part in this discussion with us. It's a very timely topic, as Steve said. As I was doing a little bit of background research, as this is my beat as a reporter, I came across a McKinsey report from last summer that underscored the importance of certain skills that would be necessary for organizations to emerge successfully from the crisis of the pandemic. And the report's authors suggested at that time that organizations will need to nurture their employees' digital, cognitive, social, and emotional adaptability and resilience skill sets. And if you didn't catch that, it bears repeating. Digital, cognitive, social and emotional, adaptability and resilience. Among those, digital and cognitive are the only ones that are so-called hard skills. And McKinsey cited LinkedIn's 2020 Workplace Learning Report to endorse this. And that report revealed that resilience was the #1 skill to build, particularly in organizations in the US, Canada, France, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Overall, they found out that 99% of learning and development executives believe that if there are gaps in these skills and they're not closed in the next 3 to 5 years, organizations are going to risk not being able to grow, as everything from customer experience and satisfaction, product development, delivery, and the company's ability to innovate are going to be impacted. So, what are some best practices to uncover and recognize these skills in the workforce to discuss, we have assembled an outstanding group of professionals who will offer their very important insights. So I'm going to go around the virtual room and ask them each to introduce themselves. Shahina, why don't we start with you? Introduce yourself briefly. Tell us how the events of the past 16 months have changed the way you're hiring.
Thank you, Lydia. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this forum. So to introduce myself, I represent Zensar, which is a technologies consulting and services company with presence in 33 global locations with about 10,000 employees. The past 16 months have been very insightful in the sense, it's been kind of, revealing, it's been kind of learning, it's been kind of enriching in many ways. But primarily from talent attraction perspective, I think it's made us, focus more on connecting better with the pool of candidates. It's made us, open to exploring many unexplored talent pools, more so because, we completely shifted to a remote operations, and being a services company, being in the IT industry, it's not that 100% of our workforce was always, physical, but, moving to 100% remote operations made us, look at more of unexplored talent pools. So I think that has been the kind of, journey for us in the past 16 months as far as talent acquisition is concerned. Thank you.
Sounds like the talent acquisition team has got to build up its soft skills as well. Julia, why don't we go to you next?
Sorry about that. You'd think I could figure out the mute button by now. I'm Julia Levy, so I lead global talent acquisition at CommScope. CommScope's probably a brand you haven't heard of before, but you probably use our products every day. We've got over 30,000 employees, and we're at the epicenter of technology transformation when it comes to connectivity and sophisticated networks. So that's a little bit about CommScope. To me, probably the most critical soft skills that are important, especially coming in through the pandemic and even now this uncertainty that we're still in, is around adaptability and problem solving. And we've definitely had to pivot a lot over the last 12 to 18 months, and I continue to see those skills as ones that are critical moving forward.
Great. Thank you. Chantal, how about you go next? Tell us how the events of the past 16 months have changed the way you're hiring.
Hi, everyone, and I'm very happy to be part of that panel. So I'm Chantal Veillon. I'm the HR lead for one of the business unit of Bristol-Myers Squibb, which is a biotech company which is developing and delivering very innovative medicines for serious disease. We're in the oncology area, as an example, immunology or cardiovascular, and over 30,000 employees globally. So the pandemic has been definitely hitting us, in a very tough way, as we had to completely reorganize our operations, but also thinking about maintaining our essential workers on site, which was no small thing, as there was no question we would stop delivering our medicines as our patients are definitely in need. And I'm very proud to say we didn't have a glitch in doing so. At the same time, for us, it's been a very challenging year last year, as we were, and this year again, as we are integrating, we're still in the integration process with another major company, another major biotech that we acquired in 2019. So that was a little bit of a double hit, for us. And from a hiring perspective, obviously, thinking about these two events, but thinking, to your question about the pandemic, we had some massive hiring, over 6,000 in 2020, and we're heading to be over 8,000 in 2021. So you can imagine, what that looks like. And obviously, the skills we've been looking at have evolved, to some extent. Resilience, that really resonated with me when you mentioned that. Adaptability, certainly, it's something that we're asking more and more, and especially in the field I'm covering, which is manufacturing and supply chain, we're really looking for these skills, and also a good amount of crisis leadership, if you will, having the right skills to be able to manage these sort of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. Good to know that there's so much hiring going on, though. That's encouraging. Anne, how about you go next?
Sure. So I'm Ann Miller. I am the Vice President of Talent Acquisition and Staffing for Memorial Hermann Health System. Memorial Hermann is probably the largest health system in Southeast Texas, predominantly in Houston, 17 hospitals and about 30,000 employees. And gosh, the last 16 months have been crazy, especially in healthcare. For us, there's the shortage of talent is just, continuing to increase, which has made us have to make hiring decisions within hours, sometimes on the spot. So it's really forcing us to have to move very quickly. It's also because of the shortage of labor, it's having us to think outside of the box of how can we get the talent we need and develop it, which brings into account why the soft skill focus is becoming so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dig into a little bit more on the skills and how you're assessing for them, because if you have to hire somebody on the spot, that's got to be a whole different type of challenge than having, at least a week to consider.
Yes.
Last but not least, Rob.
Thanks for letting me join. I've been here with SkillSurvey for 11 years. I manage a sales organization, and I have a unique perspective. I get to work with folks like yourselves that are all on this call, and hear what's happening in your world, but I also get to hire people for our team. I think the biggest thing over the last 6 months have been two things, all around soft skills. Hiring people with remote behaviors has been critical. It's one thing to go into an office and have an IT issue. What do? You walk down the hall, but how do you handle that when you're remote? And so we had to be nimble this past year and help our clients better gauge those behaviors. And then, with what happened last year in May, which was horrible, helping organizations better hire for inclusiveness. So remote behaviors, inclusiveness, those soft skills are critical right now to hiring, along with what you just said, resilience.
I've got to believe, though, that resilience wouldn't crop up in a job description. So are you looking for a full different menu of skills, and how are you putting them out there in terms of, if you're having a big hiring push, like Chantal says, 8,000 people, how do you begin to decide which soft skills you're looking for in a candidate? And because I called you, name checked you, Chantal, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. So actually, we've got a model where we're linking our interviews to our values. So our 6 company values are part of the interview process, where we are assessing our candidates against these 6 values with very targeted questions. It's not that it's, you have to go through each of the questions and assess the candidate, against those, but they're really meant, to be, or the main focus of the interview. Of course, the let's say, the technical skills are incredibly important, and we are relying on our managers to assess that also. But the interview process is all about the values. It's all about how do you remove any bias, from the system, so that you are really offering a very different experience to the candidate, but also looking at picking the right person who's going to thrive not only in that role but in future role, and really get into the company culture and bring their stone to the edifice. It's also for us a matter of diversity and inclusion, as we do believe that these soft skills and assessing or candidates on the values do help to identify different profile and offer an opportunity to people who might not on the paper look as strong from a technical perspective, but can offer also a very different profile, notably in terms of learning agility.
Well, let me just, for a clarifying question here, Chantal. So you said you're connecting to the values. So are you putting that in the job postings, like what those values are? How does, like, what are you looking for specifically when you talk about those 6 values?
So we've got, the values are not necessarily part of the job posting, even though, on our website, it's very, very clear.
Mhm.
We've got interview guide, which is, the interview guide is entirely built around the 6 values. And we've got questions, guiding questions for interviewing managers and panelists that are articulated around the values. And
Okay.
the interesting piece is also that we're building in, the manager training. So they're prepped and they're really coached and prepped for our TA team, our talent acquisition team, to drive this interview in that certain way.
Okay.
And the interview is really driven by the manager, not by HR.
Okay. Anne, I want to come back to you now. What skills are you looking for in these candidates? And I know that this is a very different ball of wax for you than it would be for others.
Well, resilience is definitely
Mhm.
a skill. And I think what you're looking for is how people bounce back, right? From challenges and the strength and what they're doing. But, for us being a service industry, customer service, that communication, teamwork, obviously working in healthcare, it's very essential. So, and those have been around. I think we have always been focused more on hard skills. And so as we're looking at the, as I said, we have to be much more open to maybe a less skilled person these days just due to the shortage. So we can train on the hard skills, but can this person problem solve? Do they have good judgment? And so it really, we do use an assessment tool on the front end, which really helps us. And then from that assessment tool, it creates an interview guide. And that's, as Chantal shared, something that all our managers are using. And it really helps them to probe and ask the right questions. And that's what they have to go
on. Julia, you mentioned a couple of soft skills, but talk to me about the importance of collaboration, which is a soft skill, and conflict resolution. Is that more important? Are you looking for that?
It's more important now than ever. So we are rolling out a more formalized Flex at Work program, and most of us are remote, although similar to Chantal, CommScope, about half of our employees are manufacturing and need to be in the office, in the manufacturing facilities every day to keep our products going. When we look at some of those soft skills around networking, conflict resolutions, it was funny, I think you had mentioned, if we think about like the tone of an email and being able to either get on video or pick up the phone. I can't tell you how many times I've had to say to someone, your email back and forth, you're fighting with each other, just pick up the phone and have a conversation if you can't be at the water cooler with somebody.
Right, exactly.
And those types of skills are really critical, especially in this more virtual environment where it's so easy to look at someone's email and read it in a funny voice in your head, right?
For sure. Yeah, we can solve this in 250 texts, or we can just pick up the phone and have a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah.
So Shahina, are you looking for collaboration and conflict resolution skills as well? I mean, I have to think of, with such a dispersed organization, that's got to be challenging too.
Yeah, so for us, that was a priority. Pre-pandemic is become all the more important in the post-pandemic scenario. More so because, for all of our associates who are dealing with customers, they are solving problems, and it never is an individual exercise. It's always done with teamwork. And now with the challenges, even for those who were working, who were co-located now that they have gone remote, we don't want the customer excellence levels to be dipping because, they are not able to effectively communicate with each other, collaborate with each other, and therefore, the importance of these kind of competencies is highly, highly enhanced. So that's something that we, watch out for, acutely look out for, while, acquiring talent from the market. And we also look at, how they have used these kind of competencies in the previous, skill space, so go into some of those details, and that helps us, make the right decision when we are acquiring talent.
For the benefit of the audience who was not privy to our green room conversation, we had talked about, how virtual communication can go sideways, and maybe you use an emoji to kind of soften something up, or, add a little flavor. But we've learned since that generational differences abound when it comes to use of things like emojis. So I'm wondering if there are any generational trends in soft skills in general. And Rob, I'm going to come to you with this question because you have your finger on this, I think, more. Are Gen Z candidates on par with their older counterparts, especially in communication and EQ?
Well, the green room conversation, I shared that I am a dad of an 18, 20, and 22-year-old. And if I don't put a question mark, I don't care what emoji I put, they're not responding. They're just not. So I put a question mark on every statement now, and that's the only way I hear from them.
But
unless
that's
they
only
need
because
something.
you're dad, though.
That's right. So I've been speaking on Gen Z quite a bit, and
Mhm.
it's interesting. What we're finding is they want to be understood in the recruitment process. They want to understand, they want you to know their nuances. And the idea is to be able to better connect with them. So if you have a recruiter who's treating everybody exactly the same in how they communicate and how they share content, they're not going to relate the same way. And so what we have found is Gen Z folks want to make sure the recruiter knows a little bit about them, can embrace them a little bit more, just so they can more adapt better. And then it has to transfer over. And so if talent acquisition folks are not sharing that information with the hiring manager, you're going to have dissatisfaction in the first 30 to 60 days, because the manager also needs to understand the nuances of that individual as well.
But in terms of their skill set, though, do you feel like they are, they have as much emotional intelligence as somebody who's been in the workforce for 20 years?
It's just different. I don't think it's more or less. I think it's a different mindset of how they communicate. There's so many articles conflicting today that Gen Z folks do not communicate unless you're texting with them. I find most of them pick up the phone and they will call. They'll do a FaceTime. So it's just a different type of communication method than maybe what I'm used to at 50 years old. I agree with you. I hate having my team send messages on Teams. Nothing against Teams. I'd rather you pick up the phone, and I'd rather you not call me through Teams. I'd rather you call me on my cell. That's how I operate. They may FaceTime much quicker. I think that's the major difference, is just understanding that every individual in today's society operates a little bit differently. Some are going to like this way of communicating while others don't. I don't think we need to judge people that way on communication.
Well, you were talking about the hiring process, and I know that it's very important to make sure that that hiring process really works for both the hiring managers and the candidates. You want to get the best people in the door, and you want that to be tight. Now, obviously, we've all been through a lot of upheaval in what that process looks like over the last year and a half. Certainly doing some of this virtually is challenging. So what I'm thinking about is, when you have to interview differently, what kind of questions, very specifically, what kind of questions are you asking to ascertain if that candidate has the skills that you want and need on your employee roster? Anne, you first.
So I'm going to speak from a leadership perspective because that's predominantly what I hire for in the organization. And we Specifically, I ask questions, what have you done to build the engagement of your team? What have you done to support their well-being? What have you done to create more balance? Those are questions that are just becoming really important for leaders. I mean, we always used to ask, tell us about, more of their business savvy. I find now we focus more on their interpersonal savviness. What have you done to collaborate with other departments? Because collaboration is such a key component. So much of so many organizations now are so matrixed. And so focusing on things around that collaboration, but definitely around their leadership style and what they are doing to support and engage their employees.
Shahina, specific questions you ask?
Yeah, so some of the questions that we focus on is, basically taking situations from, their work life scenarios and actual situations that they can relate to as to what role they played in those situations, what outcomes did they experience, what learnings did they get. So if they have been in managerial roles, how many people were they able to coach and bring up the value spectrum? So getting a sense of that tells us of their ability to lead a team as a coach, which is very important because we are in the technology space, and that's an ever evolving space. So what's relevant today is no longer relevant tomorrow. So that's a constant role that the leader has to play. From perspective of conflict resolution, which could very well happen as they go through problem solving, issues for the customer, because each one may come with a different perspective and they are expected to work in teams always. So, how they have managed those conflict situations, have been able to resolve it. And what outcomes did it screen to get into as they are hired for their team members. And, that's something which we have found great value in.
Okay. Chantal, behavioral questions you asked?
Yeah, we're having a number of these behavioral questions, and part of our hit question, there's a few ones that are coming to my mind. One is going to be around, tell us about a time you had to deal, with to lead a change, and what did you learn from it? What would you do differently? There's very often, these two sides of the question, and we're asking for very material examples, not, general statements on how people are driving things, but really how they applied that. Another one, and I was, thinking about conflict resolution, and it's not that we're having, a culture where there's a lot of conflicts. Actually, we're trying to foster a little bit more of, constructive disagreement, if you will. But one would be, how, tell us about a time where you had to provide some challenging feedback to a colleague or a peer, and we're being very specific in asking, a colleague or a peer, because we don't want that example where the person gave feedback to one of his team member, because that's a little bit too easy, if you will. So we're pushing really the envelope in these questions by asking, about situational questions and real life examples, to see how the person's no right or wrong answer, but we really want to see how the person is dealing, from a leadership perspective and behavior perspective with that.
Julia, specifically around collaboration, are you asking those types of behavioral questions to assess how do you know if somebody really can collaborate virtually? What do you ask?
From a collaboration perspective, we may ask things like, how do they usually develop relationships with coworkers or supervisors? Or a time they had to deal with someone that was difficult, and how did they turn that around? We might ask about a time that they had communication problems to try and get at how they collaborated or influenced with people. There's a number of questions that we'll ask around things like collaboration and communication style.
Rob, similar question, but more thinking about creativity. Can you ask a question to really determine if somebody's creative, or does it have to be one of those oddball ones like, we have a school bus, how many golf balls fit into this?
Oh my gosh. I absolutely
Never ask those questions.
no. The questions I'm typically asking are around, when you experienced a loss, in your business life, how did you bounce back? But more importantly, when you did lose initially, how creative did you get? What did you have to do? Who did you have to go to within your organization to not only get approval, but to bounce that idea off of? What did you do to go back to the customer? Did you whiteboard the solution? It comes down to creativity is much aligned with problem solving and adaptability. And I think that has been the strongest predictor of success across all organizations, is understanding that. So if you can talk to somebody and ask the questions around creativity that get to problem solving, adaptability, you'll generally get the right answers.
Are there good ways to measure this in terms of doing like aptitude tests instead of behavioral type interviews?
So my background is in personality assessments and measuring that. But at the same time, for the last 11 years, we've used a different approach by getting third parties, previous managers and peers, to evaluate the person on how they perceive that person in those behaviors. When you do that way, you're getting more objective data, and you're able to provide insights back to the organization they've never dreamed of. And now, instead of the candidate telling you one more time about themselves during the process, and again, I like assessments, so I'm not bad mouthing them, but getting third parties to tell you what they've seen live is a good predictor of success.
I want to flip this around and focus on the hiring managers, because as I just mentioned, a lot of this process has gone virtual. Not everybody knows how to do this. Sometimes live and in person. It's a little weird when it's just a video screen. You can't assess body language or anything like that. So in a certain way, it's a good thing because you're removing some of the unconscious bias that might be there. But on the other hand, it might bring up other things that would trigger some biases. So what training, and this is a question for all of you, what training are you offering hiring managers to make sure that the interview process is equitable, even if parts of it are virtual or hybrid? Somebody want to raise their hand? Take this one first. Okay, Julia.
So we just launched a new global learning platform, and we've got some training around unconscious bias and hiring. And we also have training on just the recruitment process to help get people a little more comfortable on what's good and what's bad. So we're in the process of kind of pre-packaging and rolling some of that out to the organization. So what's happening in the meantime is the recruiters really act as consultants and help coach and guide the hiring managers, especially those, because you have some hiring managers that they do this day in and day out and they don't need the coaching, but you have a lot that this is the first time they've ever hired or the first time in many years. And so our recruiting team will offer up tips and suggestions and send individual classes, online classes over to people. And we're developing a whole toolkit around this. It's not there yet, but it's in the works. I'm excited about it.
It's all a work in progress right now, isn't it? Chantal,
Yeah,
I training.
Yeah, we've got also some training, I would say those unconscious bias or is named minus the bias, which we're deploying with all managers, which is very powerful. It's not only covering hiring, but there's obviously, tied to that. And then also some very specific, training on hiring. There is, we're doubling down, as I said, with having our talent acquisition team really coaching the hiring manager and making sure they're prepped, they know how to run it, they understand how that's going to play out. One of the practice that and that's part of the coaching is to put in place some interview panels. So We're also making sure that we're having diverse interview panel with people who are not seeking the same or not looking the same. So going back to our millennials as an example, having somebody in the interview panel which is looking like you is extremely important. And these are the sort of things we're putting in place, and there's some repetition to that as we're making sure for each of the hiring this is happening. So it's not because you've got a hiring manager who's been hiring, let's say, a month ago, that the hiring manager is not going to be coached again by talent acquisition. So that's part of what we're putting in place.
Okay. Shahina, you're training your hiring managers to do anything differently?
Sure. So, we train our managers continuously on the code of conduct, which basically, ensures that they represent the brand well as they go through the selection program. But at the same time, what we have also realized is, given the circumstances, there's a requirement for coaching managers as they go through, various kind of scenarios and situations. Ideally, at least one of the interview meetings would have been in person. But now with all of that having gone remote, more virtual, the time spent has kind of reduced. So the ability to build that connection with the candidate, is that much more diminished. So how do they, are able to communicate the culture of the company in that, in a remote setting is something which is very important. And that's something that we have been working on. Is still work in progress. I would say we don't have a training plan already established for it. The other aspect that we focus on is that, we also coach our managers to, if they're not sure, again, because, talent is so scarce, there's a fierce war of talent going on. If they're not sure, not to reject the candidate outright. It's always better to take a second view and therefore have somebody else do the interview, and then we all come together around a virtual table and make that decision. So patience and being able to represent the culture of the company well, those are some of the aspects that we are focusing on.
Okay. Anne, your thoughts?
So like some others said, we have a leadership academy here, which covers a whole bunch of things, but obviously the people aspect of it, to include interviewing as well as retention, is a big component of it. I think as part of the interview process, and I think a lot of companies have moved this way, is we also do panel interviews now. I think panel interviews have become a big way with Zoom. It makes it easier. And so the ultimate, typically we try to have not more than like 3 managers part of an interview process, but they all kind of bounce off each other too and build off those questions. So that is something that, we have had to provide training on. And because it's so competitive, really have had to help managers understand the importance of selling. We've all come from so tell me why you should work here. And now it's, so tell me why, let me tell you why you should work. We've really had to get into selling our organization versus looking at candidates as, we're gonna have so many, it's very different today.
Rob, did you want to add some thoughts?
What I'm hearing is a lot of what I'm seeing in my customers, but I think the other thing I can add is most organizations are moving to more data points. The old days of taking a resume and screening the candidate and throwing it over to the hiring manager is changing. Managers need to have as much data as possible to be objective early on. And I think the other big change is not just in the hiring managers, but making sure whatever technologies you're using can stand up to make sure they're free of bias. I think those are the critical things that I'm seeing from my perspective.
Yeah, I've covered the developments in AI in all aspects of the hiring spectrum. And on the surface, it seems like, oh, well, you take the human out of the equation, you automatically get a more equitable process. Yes, Rob, you're shaking your head. And, artificial intelligence is only as good as its data set. Where does that data set come from? How large is it? How diverse is it? Who's responsible for putting it together. All of those questions are really important to ask. But for those of you who are using some measure of tech in your hiring process, what measure do you have to make sure that it's working? Someone raise their hand, or I will call on you like the teacher. Anne?
Sorry. I think retention is, acceptance and retention is what we're looking for, as if it's working. There's a lot of focus on quality of hire. And so we still, I can't say have mastered that, but I think really looking at people who stay, and we look at engagement scores, we look at things like that say, oh, we're making good decisions. I mean, you definitely can see where there's pockets in organizations where managers struggle with their own soft skills and just don't have the ability right now, I think, to relate to the staff based on the needs today. And so those are some of the tools we use.
Julia?
So one of the tools that we implemented earlier this year is Textio, from writing augmentation and looking at gender tone in our job postings, and also generational language and words. And so we're measuring the success of that as we look at data around our applicant pools, and are we increasing, are we seeing a better quality applicant? We're looking at diversity throughout our application process. And so that's a way that we're looking to remove some bias and gender tone from our process on the upfront in the attraction phase, and then measuring its success downstream.
Chantal, you want to add?
Yeah, so we're using a few measurements. Well, first, they were for our executives, VP plus, we're introducing a quarterly assessment, which is very comprehensive, creating success profiles. We've got success profiles against our main VPs in the organization, and we're assessing through leadership dimensions and competencies, experience, traits, and drivers. So that's a very in-depth assessment, which is both made through an online assessment, but also through a conversation. So that's something we're deploying right now. We've been using previously another type of assessment, which was a little bit less comprehensive than that one. And then, on all levels, yes, absolutely, we're looking at diversity. We're looking at that very closely. And we've been doing also a whole assessment on a number of job description on removing some of the biased language. And I don't know which technology, I have to confess, I don't know which technology has been used, but there's been quite some screening on the job description to make sure that we're removing some of these biased language and have more of the, predictors of, what a good profile would look like.
Shahina, do you want to add to that?
Sorry. So for us, I would say that technology plays, only so much part in screening of profiles. It's more about, assessing how successful each of these candidates that we hire have been at their jobs. And the way we do that is evaluate all of us on what we call as the Zensarian 5.0 competencies, which is basically a combination of skill sets that are required for everyone to be successful in the organization. So that's an ongoing process. And against that, we continuously, kind of reinvent what is required in terms of competencies that we need in the organization, which also feeds into our learning system. So I would say that, technology only helps us shortlist, few profiles from plenty, but beyond that, it's a very it's a very candidate driven or a candidate specific process, which is led by the hiring managers, and therefore the focus on training them, coaching them, and ensuring that they have the right set of understanding to find the best suited candidate for the organization.
I realize it's a bit of a leap to talk about artificial intelligence in hiring when we're talking about soft skills in teams, but it has to be a symbiotic relationship in the way that we work today. So we are bumping right up against 45 minutes past the hour. So that means that I'm going to invite Steve back on, do our little station break, and then we're going to get to audience Q&A. Steve?
Thanks, Lydia, and thanks to all of you who are participating in this webinar on hiring for teams with the right combination of soft skills. And thanks to our sponsor, SkillSurvey. Before we get to your questions, I want to mention a special offer. In case you missed it at the beginning of the event, I want to let you know that one of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up next Wednesday, August 18th. It's titled Learning from a Crisis About What Working Parents Need. For all of you HR leaders out there concerned about the parents in your workforce, this should be very informative for you. Thanks to today's sponsor, we're offering a complimentary VIP ticket to those of you participating today. These are normally $149, so this is a moment to grab one while you can. I've placed the link in the chat again. So thank you for checking that out, and at this time, we'll be taking questions from our audience. Lydia, back to you.
Great, thank you very much. We're getting a lot of good questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. Just want to remind the audience, if you have specific questions for specific panelists, please feel free to reach out to them directly via LinkedIn or their organization's website. That's probably the best way to get your very pointed questions answered. But to the more general questions, here's an interesting one that I actually had in my little basket of questions and we didn't get to. Have you had the experience of picking someone for a team who has a soft skill that's different from the rest of the group, whether it's creativity, good humor, problem solving, and so on? So I think really what's being asked here is like, how do you kind of make the ingredients work together? Anyone want to pitch that one first?
Yeah, I can go.
Chantal, go ahead.
Yeah, I love that question. I like that proactive idea of having different set of soft skills and different personalities. So that's something we're, as part of our diversity focus, we're looking very closely at and encouraging in the hiring process, whether it's an internal hire or an external hire, by the way, it doesn't matter, to really look at what's the current balance in your team. How does your team look like? Do you have a bias towards action, or are you more reflective? What type of team are you, and how can you complement that profile with somebody who's going to look different and think different than you? And that's something we're really pushing for, as we know that diversity of thought is so much efficient and productive when it comes to innovation, when it comes to creativity, when it comes to problem solving. So I really love the question. That's not always easy to do, because you've got a bias at hiring people who think like you, but it's a real effort. And that's why I think the training, the unconscious bias training is so important, especially for hiring manager, because then you start realizing that you've got all these bias, you can start working on them. If you're not even conscious of that, what can you do about it? So I'd really encourage anyone to think about it, because there's so much richness. And I have to say, I've been doing a number of hiring in my own team over the past 8 months, and I've been very consciously thinking about bringing very different people so that we can continue challenging each other in a very productive way.
Diversity of thought, because that's kind of what it boils down to, versus diversity that sometimes you can actually see. Additional thoughts on bringing together people with different skills?
I
Oh,
think there's
Rob and
a,
Ann both pressing at the same time. Go ahead, Rob.
I'm sorry, Ann. I just think there's enough, there's a wide variety of tools and methods out there that you can understand what kind of ingredients you're getting for your team today.
Mhm.
And so if your organization's leveraging that, you can build a team of like Gilligan's Island. You can have the Skipper and Marianne and the Howls. It's you have that ability, but I think too many organizations shortchange the hiring process. There's going to be times, like Ann talked about earlier, where you have to just go out and hire the people as fast as possible and do the best you can. But
Mhm.
there's enough talent out there today that you can make the perfect soup for your team.
Mhm. Ann, you were gonna.
Yeah, I was just gonna really echo what was said is the unbiased training, I think is just a huge today for organizations to have that, not only for leaders, but for all staff. And I think that does really encourage that diversity of thought, that the way that people approach things differently. And there's so many good studies on that. I think one I read is the more conflict there is in a team, the better the outcome. And even though, when we think of conflict, I think, we naturally think of, disagreements and arguments and just not getting along, but we need that conflict to come out with the best results.
Mhm. Absolutely. This is a really interesting one. What red flags during interviews might show you that someone is lacking in soft skills? Someone want to tell us about their personal experience with someone lacking? And so, Julia, what were you going to say?
I think that it's really important to probe, and that you might find that someone's just unsure of how to get their words out properly and tell the right story. So I think it's really important to probe and get hiring managers to feel comfortable digging a little deeper. So if somebody's just talking very high level and not getting specific, I'll try and probe on getting them specific to what they really did or where their thoughts are. And if someone can't drill down to that level, then that's where I have a red flag. If someone's just staying at that 50,000-foot level on something and can't really talk about what they did, the impact that they had, what their challenges were, things like that. So that's how you can at least try and dig in and uncover. I don't know that I had, I guess, if someone's that's probably the best advice I'd have for uncovering some big red flag.
Mhm.
Yeah, if I can build on that, I think in these interviews, you can see sometimes people really talking out of a textbook. So they give you all the right example, they gave you all the right recipe. Here is my methodology in 3 points or whatever, and they go on and on with that. And to me, that's one of the red flags, and I'm really paying attention to that. Or those who are using a lot of I, and put themselves, forward, very aggressively. So something to your point, Julia, you really need to probe on that and really understand what's been your true contribution, what's been your true inputs in what you're explaining, or how do you put it truly in practice?
So many questions coming in. Does this competitive market make it particularly hard to find people with certain types of human skills, like people with the skill to plan ahead? It is a competitive market. We are in the midst of the Great Resignation. What do you all think, Shahina?
I think yes, but that's where I think as organizations, we have to make those calls because if we always rely on, planning to buy talent from market, we'll never get the right fit. That's where the investment approach comes in. So we always look for the potential. We always look for the experience, the ability to learn and develop as the organization grows. So, having found such a talent, we would always put our money behind developing them, So that's the approach that we would like to take. And yes, it's a very competitive market. And if we wait for the 100% fit will never be there.
Additional thoughts? Otherwise, I don't want to take another one. Okay. How do you tackle pre-hire conversations where you are selling the culture, but simultaneously know that you are hiring the person into a difficult or challenging environment? Example, in healthcare right now, cough, cough, Anne, everyone is burnt out and there are staffing shortages. We have a great culture, but it's being tested. We need resilience, which is hard to measure. Some thoughts from hiring into a challenging environment.
I would say, my style and what I encourage my recruiters to do is to give a very realistic profile of what you're coming into. If you're coming into an understaffed department, if you're coming into an environment where you're going to be working more than 40 hours a week, if you're coming in a department that's a manager isn't, the manager role is vacant. I mean, any of those things, I truly believe as recruiters, we are responsible for the people we hire. And if you just try to force a hire and recruit and just to fill it, it usually doesn't work out, and you've lost that trust. And so you have to be honest with people and you have to ask the hard questions and let them ask you the hard questions and answer them honestly.
That's good advice. Beth wants to know, I find one of the hardest things to assess during the hiring process is whether the candidate takes initiative. Everyone can have a story about a time they did this, but I find it hard to figure out whether the story they tell is a reflection of how they actually act. What are some questions you ask or ways you assess initiative? Thoughts? Chantal?
Yeah, I think part of that, and again, it's a really good question. As I'm thinking about the questions, we're building in, probing on. If people give you examples, and well, contrary to what I say, you don't hear a lot of I, but you hear a lot of, we, the team, and so on and so forth. One of the probing question is, what's been your real contribution into that? What's been your unique contribution into the project? What have you personally achieved? What have you personally influenced? What were your own objectives in that project? So you really want to be very specific on, what's very unique to that person achievement and what they've been doing. And it doesn't need to be that, they've been leading the whole project or they've been, turning around the whole company. Everyone can, and you need to put people at ease on the fact that even, a small thing can have a great impact when you think about, building the whole edifice and making sure, that they understand that, because it's also part of how do you put forward, back to and answer on, how do you welcome someone in a challenging environment? What type of culture are you going to be in, and are we going to promote, that type of initiative? So you really need to think about it two ways. The way the person is answering and really providing material example, but the way the company is also going to welcome that answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, an initiative, I'm glad you were talking about like all different kinds of impact, or all different kinds of initiative can have all different kinds of impacts. I have to believe that, even something simple as, you see that there might be like a glitch in a process and just raise your hand and say, hey, did anybody think about this? I mean, that's basically taking initiative on something. So is there a way to ask that question to get that kind of response? Anne?
Well, I was going to say, asking that question, but then it goes into the probing, right? What did you do? How did you get the buy-in? What obstacles did you face? Going into the resilience, all the things that kind of go on. And so I think, you can't just ask one question. You have to keep asking a question on top of the question. You see all the time candidates put in, their accomplishments. That's what candidates are trained to do, right? Put your accomplishments. So, all I would say is just, you can pick any one of them and just really probe on that and say, how did you do it? Why did you do it? Was it your idea? Really getting them to, what led to this being done. And I think that's where you hear it. And a lot of times, I think we do find that people list things that they really didn't drop. They take credit for, but they don't always, so the more questions you ask, the better.
Well, we are right at the top of the hour, and that's all the time we have. I could certainly talk about this for another 3 hours with you all. So thank you for spending the time with me, Rob and Shahina, Julia, and Chantal. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today. Steve?
Thanks, Lydia. I second the motion. You've all put serious thought into this, and it really shows in the kinds of innovation you're bringing to it. So thank you again. Thanks to our sponsor, SkillSurvey, and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming events. As I've mentioned, next Wednesday, August 18th, we'll be doing our monthly full-scale conference with panel discussions, workshops, and networking. We're going to be focusing on learning from a crisis about what working parents need right now. Visit our website at fromday1.co to learn more. On Tuesday, August 31st, we'll be talking about building a hybrid culture, work from anywhere, but aligned from everywhere. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.